Hi guys, I'm excited to show you how to make my Winter Wonderland tank today. Feel free to click the link in the video description to download your free pattern PDF. So if you would like to follow along with a printed pattern, feel free to do that. If you do not need help with video instructions and are just looking for the pattern, go ahead and download it. But just wanted to quickly show you what's included in the pattern. I've got all of the measurements listed out for you guys, but if you are new to reading patterns, the tank is written in 10 sizes, 1 through 10. And then if you go through each area of the pattern, I've got 10 numbers listed out. So, you know, if it mentions the bust size, it lists out 10 different bust size. So I knit a size 3, right? So I like to go through with a pen and circle the third number when you've got numbers listed out. So I knit a size 3. That means the bust is about 37.5 inches. And, you know, if you reference everything here, it says to cast on here 72, 76, 80 stitches. I cast on 80 because I'm knitting a size 3, so it's that third number in. So that's just a little bit of a background on how to read patterns if you're new to, if you're newer to knitting. But I hope you enjoy the video. This is such a great tank. It's super soft. It knits up really, really quickly. You can also use Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick yarn, but just make sure you check your gauge. All right, happy knitting. All right, to make this tank, you will need 2 skeins. Well, let me say this. I made this in 1 skein. It was really close. I would suggest getting 2 skeins to be safe. I use Lion Brand Respun Thick and Quick. It is 100% recycled polyester yarn. These are very large skeins. 1 skein is 12 ounces, 340 grams, 223 yards, or 204 meters. So if you are using a different kind of yarn, just make sure you're planning accordingly. I would say you should probably have, you know, anywhere between 225 to 300 yards depending on what size you're making. All right, this is the color whipped cream. You will need a 12 millimeter circular knitting needle. I used a 40 inch. This is probably a little long, so I would use a 32 or 36 inch, whatever you can find. You will need a size, this is a size 10 millimeter US 15, or it's a size N for crochet people. This is a crochet hook that I use to do a slip stitch border around the work. So if you're interested in doing that, make sure you have a 10 millimeter crochet hook. You will need a tapestry needle to weave in ends and to help put the work onto scrap yarn. You will need 2 stitch markers, or you can use waste yarn. You will also need a lot of waste yarn to hold stitches. You're gonna put half the work on a longer piece of waste yarn, and then you'll need smaller pieces to hold the left-right fronts. You will also need a tape measure to measure the length from the underarm, and you are gonna wanna measure the length of the left and right front. Time to cast on. I'm going to take my 12 millimeter needles, circular needles. I've got a 40. You know, smaller needles will work, 32, 36. This is just what I've got handy, and I'm making a size that I think will work with this length. So I'm going to cast on 80 stitches for my tank. To get the number, I'm going to wrap my yarn around about 10 times, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, to get the cast on length that I need for about 10 stitches. And then I'm just gonna multiply that here. That's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So that just helps you estimate how much yarn you'll need for your cast on stitches. The worst thing is casting on stitches and finding out you don't have enough yarn. So at the end of that length, you can just tie a slip knot and start casting on your stitches. So I'm casting on 80 stitches. The tank is meant to fit a little bit looser, not real tight. So if you want to make it tighter, you can go down a size or two. All right, so I'm going to use the long tail cast on. Make sure your tail is in the front. You grab the yarn and you're going to go under the yarn around your thumb, over your yarn around the index finger, and pull it through. So now you've got 2 stitches cast on. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So continue until you get to the end of your cast on stitches, and I'll show you how to join in the round. All right, so I've got 80 stitches cast on. This circular needle is a little long for this, but it's kind of just what I've got handy, but that's okay. So I've cast on 80 stitches, my cast on amount. I'm going to cast on one more stitch because we're going to use that extra stitch to connect our beginning and end of round. So to join the work in the round, you slip that last stitch off your left needle onto the right needle. You're going to slip that extra stitch we just cast on over that stitch and drop it. And then you can pull the work, and now you've joined in the round. So you're going to take 2 stitch markers now, one to note the beginning of round marker and one to note the center of the work. So now we are going to make sure you're not knitting with your extra tail. And you're going to start working your 1 by 1 rib all the way across. We're going to do the 1 by 1 rib by knitting 1 stitch, purling a stitch, and you do this all the way around. We're going to mark the center, so once I get to 40 stitches, halfway across my cast on stitches, I'm going to put my marker down so I know what the middle of the work is. So this will separate, that stitch marker will separate the front and back of my work. All right, so knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and continue to halfway, 2, 4, 6, 8. I've got 8 stitches. Now I'm going to continue across to 40 stitches, and I'll just show you how to put that stitch marker on. All right, I've just finished my 40th stitch there, halfway across my work. And so I just placed my stitch marker. So you just continue all the way around. Knitting, purling. So if this is halfway across your stitches, it's after an even number. So you should be purling, then placing the stitch marker, and then knitting. All right, I'm nearing the end of my first knit 1, purl 1, or 1 by 1 rib round, and I just want to show you how to keep going. So I'm going to knit 1, and again, you should end on a purl stitch, because when you do a 1 by 1 rib, you're working across an even number of stitches, so you should end with a purl. All right, so you slip that first stitch, your beginning of round marker, you slip that marker, okay, and then you just simply continue to knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches. So you can see that this is a knit stitch because you can see the V, and a purl stitch, you'll see that little backward stitch. So you just continue to knit 1, purl 1. And we're going to complete this knit 1, purl 1 for 4 rounds. So I'm on my second round right now. So I will see you back here once I've completed my 4 rounds, and then we'll start working the body. And you can count 1 stitch, 2 stitch. So then you'll know you've got 4 rounds completed. All right, so I am finishing my last stitch in my 1x1 rib. I've got 4 rows completed, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it's time to just knit the body. So we're gonna just knit stockinette stitch, which just means we knit every round of our work. So I will meet you back here once I have completed the length of my body to my underarm. Okay, so I have finished the length from the bottom to the underarm, and this will also be where kind of the V-neck starts. And I went to about 12 inches here. And what you can do is take another tank top you have, something that you like that fits you well, and kind of measure from the center of your bust line to the bottom to see where it falls, just to get an idea of what kind of the length that you want. So yes, I've written directions out, but feel free to customize this if you want this to be shorter or longer based on how you want this to fit you. So now we are going to start working the front. And to do this, we knit to the marker, and just want to note the front and the back are the same. So I'm just calling this the front, but it doesn't really matter. So we are going to work, we are going to knit all the way to the center of, we're going to work across the front. We're just going to knit across the front, and then we are going to remove the back stitches, and then we're going to begin decreasing and separating for the one of the fronts. All right, so we're going to knit all the way across. All right, so we're going to knit to that first marker. So now we've knit across the front. So what we're going to do now is we are going to remove this marker and place these stitches on a piece of scrap yarn. So take your tapestry needle and a piece of scrap yarn and move all of these back stitches to a piece of waste yarn. And this will just help you separate the work so you don't get mixed up and start knitting these stitches. If you're more advanced, some people can work with these stitches still on the needle and just work the right amount of stitches without getting confused. So just take all of these stitches off all the way up to that beginning of round marker. Okay, I'm almost to that beginning of round marker, and you can take this off now, and you can just pull that piece of waste yarn through. Make sure it's long enough where your stitches sit comfortably on the waste yarn. Okay, so all right, so you've got the front stitches on your needles, and if you want, you can place a stitch marker at the halfway point of your front stitches. So we're going to be working the right front here, and I cast on 80 stitches. 80 divided by 2 is 40 stitches. So I have 40 stitches for the front, 40 stitches for the back. And then if you divide 40 by 2, that's 20. So that's 20 stitches for the left front and the right front. So if we were to put this on, this is our right front. This would sit on the right side. So I'm just going to take a piece of scrap yarn and count across half my stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 right here. And I am just going to tie like a loose knot. You don't want to tie it really tight because you want your needle to be able to kind of go through that. But there you go. Okay, or if you have a removable stitch marker, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Okay, so it's definitely in the middle. Okay, so we are going to just work back and forth across this right front. And this stitch marker helps us remember to stop. Okay, so we are going to start decreasing for the right front now. All right, our first stitch, we are just going to simply purl. And the beginning at the end of each row, we will have either a knit or purl stitch. Okay, now we are going to reduce by just simply purling 2 stitches together. Then we are going to purl across until we get to 3 stitches before the end of our right side. And then we're going to reduce again. So we'll show you how to do that. And then we'll end with 1 purl stitch. So there's always a purl or knit stitch at the beginning and at the end of each row on both the wrong side and the right side of the work. So once you have 3 stitches left, instead of purling 2 together, normally we're going to purl 2 together through the back loop. So our goal is to get our stitches slanted a certain way, and we have to reverse or mirror what we're doing on one side with the other side to get the stitches to slant a certain way. So as you can see on this side, I've already got my stitches slanting this way, so now I need to get them to slant the other way. And so to purl 2 together through the back loop, you essentially stick your needle through backwards here, and you just purl those together. That's a little tricky. That can be hard to do, but now I've got the stitch going that way. Okay, so I will show you that again. We're going to keep doing this for a little bit here. We're going to turn our work, and we are going to reduce 2 stitches on this side as well. So we knit 1, and now we need to keep this slant going this direction. So we're going to do a slip, slip, knit, and then we knit till 3 stitches to the end. And once you get to 3 stitches to the end, you're going to do a knit 2 together and knit 1. So we've reduced 2 stitches on our first row and 2 stitches on our second row. So these are pretty steep decreases here. So we're going to turn our work, and we're going to do those decreases again. So we are going to purl 1, purl 2 together, and then we purl to 3 stitches to the end. And now we do that purl 2 together through the back loop. So you insert your needle through both stitches coming from the other direction. I'll show you that again. And you then yarn over and pull through that way. And then you purl 1. So now we've decreased 6 stitches. Okay. And now we're going to do another decrease. So it's knit 1, slip, slip, knit. So we decrease there, knit to 3 stitches to the end. And then once you get to 3 stitches to the end, you do a knit 2 together. And, whoops, don't drop your needle. And then you knit 1. Okay? So you can see now that with our work that the stitches are starting to slant this way and this way. It makes for some great, I really like the way it starts to work out. Okay, so I have completed 4 decrease rows. So if I started off with 20 stitches and I've completed 4 decrease rows, I should be down 8 stitches since we decrease 2 stitches for each row for one of the fronts. So the size I'm making says to continue the decrease rows until I have 6 stitches left. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So I need to do 3 more decrease rows. So continue on in this fashion, following the amount of decreases you're supposed to do for your pattern. So I will see you back here once I have 6 stitches left. All right, so I've got my 6 stitches left. And now we're simply just going to knit and purl, knit the right side of the work and purl on the wrong side of the work. And we're gonna just continue stackinette stitch to the length of the strap that you want. So because I'm kind of designing here on the go, I am going to see how long I go, see what makes sense, and I'll let you know. But basically one thing you can do is take another tank top that you've got and just see how long the straps are from the underarm. You know, if it's a tank top that fits you well, you can just kind of compare and get an idea what makes sense. I have a little bit more of a shorter, my straps are usually shorter than the average Joe. So just keep that in mind when you're comparing your size to mine. You might want to add some length. I typically, like when I buy dresses, I have to get like the straps raised and kind of raise the dress up. Everything just sits a lot lower on me. So just keep that in mind when you're comparing. And one other thing to note is I would go a little bit longer than you might think, because I'm going to show you guys how to do a slip stitch border with a crochet hook to kind of clean up the gaps here that you're going to end up getting at the underarm and at the V. So just keep that in mind. I'll show you how to do that, but that can kind of tighten up your neckline a little bit. I'm going to show you how to do it so it stays kind of loose, but just know you want to err on being probably a tad longer or a little bit bigger than you would think if you're going to do the slip stitch border with the crochet hook. All right, so I have knit mine. I've knit stackinette stitch for about 5.5 inches or so, I would say. 5 inches, between 5 and 5.5 inches from the top of that. You know, one thing that you can do is, one thing that I like to do is kind of leave a long tail. We only have 6 stitches here. Leave a long tail so you can knit a few more rows in case it's too short at the end. So what we're gonna do is snip the yarn, all right, and then take another piece of scrap yarn and put those 6 stitches. So I've got my tail, and then I'm weaving another piece of scrap yarn back through here. So I'm just gonna put these 6 stitches on a piece of scrap yarn, and this kind of, there's a couple different ways you can join the work at the end, but this allows you to kind of see how it's fitting. Okay, so I still have my left front stitches still on my piece of work here. So I am going to turn the work over. This is our V-neck here. This is the V in the front. Okay, so when we wear this, this side will be on our left front. So we are going to join the work at the center of that V-neck. And simply, you join the work by taking the tail. You can take the stitch marker off now and just start working, okay? So we're going to push the needle, the left needle here on, and get ready to start working with the right side. Bring that needle around, and we're gonna just start just like we did decreasing before. So purl 1, purl 2 together, purl to the last 3 stitches, and then we're going to do that same purl 2 together through the back loop. So we are repeating exactly what we just did. What's great about this tank is that all four sides, left, front, right, front, the front, left, front, right, front, and the back are identical. But it just means you kind of need to make sure you're starting on the right or the wrong. We're starting on the wrong side of the work when we do the decreases. So, whoops, 3 stitches. We're gonna purl 2 together through the back loop again and purl 1. Okay, flip the work again, and it will be kind of loose here in the front, and we'll just kind of tug that and weave that end in later. Okay, so it's the same thing. Knit 1, slip, slip, knit, knit to 3 stitches to the end, knit 2 together, knit 1. Okay, 3 stitches to the end, knit 2 together, knit 1, and then you can kind of tug on that loose end there. Okay, so you're going to continue. So we just did 4 decreases. So you're going to continue working just like you did this side, decreasing to the number of stitches you're supposed to decrease to, continue the stockinette length to the same length, cut a piece of waste yarn, and put this work on a piece of waste yarn. So I will see you back here once I've completed the left front. Okay, so I've got the front finished, front or back, doesn't matter. And just know that when you put it on, the yarn's a little heavy, so it will drape down a little bit more. I know sometimes I make these they look so tiny, but once I put them on, it does kind of drape down a lot more over the shoulders. All right, so it's time for us to repeat what we just did for the front for the back. Okay, so we are going to pick up half of the stitches to start working. Now I've got 20 stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 stitches on. I'm gonna pull out my waste yarn here. So I'm gonna keep these stitches on the waste yarn so I can just work it back and forth on our left back side. So we're gonna join the yarn in the center, and then we're just going to knit across. So we start our decreases on the wrong side. So you just join by simply starting to knit. I'm gonna give myself a little bit longer of a tail there. And then we will just knit across, and then we're gonna turn the work and start our decrease round again. Okay, so knit across. All right, I've knit across, then you turn the work and you start working this side just as you did the other sides. So you just purl 1, purl 2 together, purl to the last 3 stitches, purl 2 together through the back loop, and then you turn the work and do the 2 decreases on the right side. So you now can just repeat exactly what you just did. So you can skip back to the chapter if you need to see again, but basically you're just reducing till you get to the number of stitches you're supposed to get to. You knit to the same length that you did on the front, and then you'll just put those stitches on a piece of scrap yarn again, and then I'll show you what to do next. So there's the purl 2 together through the back loop, purl 1, and then you can just tighten that stitch if you need to, and then you turn the work and continue decreasing. So I'll meet you back here once I've finished this side. All right, so I have my left back finished. Now I need to do my right back, and we're gonna do the same thing we just did on this side, where we move all of these stitches that are on my waste yarn back onto the needle, and we're gonna connect the yarn over here and knit, and then do our decreases on the wrong side. So one of the trickiest things when you do a tank like this is just figuring out where to join the yarn and where to start. So I tried to design this so you're decreasing, you always start decreasing on the back on the same side. So you can just kind of repeat everything. You just have to make sure you're joining and starting everything correctly. So you can start by, if you put your needles on the work this way, you'll be ready to go knitting starting over here. All right, so I'm just gonna pull that piece of waste yarn out, set that aside, and now I'm going to join the work on the right side at the right underarm, and I'm simply going to make sure you leave a tail long enough to weave in. You just start knitting, and you just knit all the way across. All right, so I'm knitting all the way across, and then I'm simply going to turn the work over and start my decreases and continue this side just like we did all the other sides. So purl 1, purl 2 together, purl 2 3 stitches to the end, and then purl 2 together through the back loop, turn the work over, knit 1, and continue doing the decreases just like you did on the right side. Okay, so I will see you back here once I've got this right back panel finished. And then I'll show you how to connect the straps. Now I'm going to show you how to do a 3 needle bind off and seam the top of the work. So basically, you're going to want to turn the work inside out. And take your circular needles. You will also need some sort of third needle. You can use a DPN, you can use another circular needle. It doesn't matter what size, just don't go any bigger than 12 millimeters. I would just go smaller. Not too much smaller, but if you have like a 9 or 10 millimeter needle, that's totally fine. Okay, so put all of these back onto your work, making sure your needles are facing to the right here. And make sure you get the correct stitch back on the needle. Okay, so that's one side. And now I'm going to get these stitches back on the other side. And you should have an end long enough to use to do this. If you don't, it's okay. Just use another piece of yarn. Okay, so my work is back on my needles. I'm going to use this end to do the work here. And basically, you are going to want to take your third needle and you're going to slip a stitch, and then knit these two together, okay? A little backwards here. So you're gonna slip, knit the stitches off the needles, and then knit them together and bind off as you go. Slip, slip. It's easier if you use that back needle. And so now I've got 2 stitches on, and I am just going to bind off as I go, okay? So slip, slip, knit, and bind off. Slip, slip, knit, and bind off. Slip, slip, knit, and bind off. And your last piece, it can be hard because you drop your needles. You might need to like pull the yarn, and once you get to your last stitch, slip. I need to knit these two together here. Okay, so I've got 2 stitches left on the needles. Again, you might need to pull this, and then you can just lift that last stitch over and cut. Well, it should be cut already. You just pull that through, and now you've seamed that together. We're gonna do a little cleanup with the edges here with our crochet slip stitch. So there, you've seamed one side together, and it looks pretty good on the other side. I'll show you that again. That was a little rough. It's kind of hard to do. If you know how to graft, you can graft. If you want, you can just bind off traditionally and seam. There's only 6 stitches, so I think it's actually harder to show you when there's fewer stitches because the work is a little more difficult to work with. Okay, so I'm going to pull this through and get that side set up. And I am going to get these stitches back on the needle and pull this off. Okay, so now we're ready to graft. I've got an end long enough, and I am going to slip, slip, knit these 2 together, slip, slip, knit these 2 together, that definitely can happen. Okay, slip, slip, knit 2 together, oops, I didn't bind off. Goodness gracious. Bind that off first. I'm going to knit these 2 together. Okay, let me try to show you again. Now I did have these on my needle. Let's see. Okay, slip, slip, knit 2 together, bind off, slip, slip, knit 2 together and bind off, and then the last one, slip, slip, knit 2 together, bind off, and pull the stitch through. Okay, that's a 3 needle bind off, and again we will fix this up with our border. Okay, so now you can flip your work right side out, and I'll show you how to do the crocheted border. So you can weave in the ends if you would like, and if you really don't want to do the border, don't worry about it. You don't have to do it. You will have this gap. If you want, you could just seam up a gap a little bit with the waste yarn that you've got there. You can use a new piece of yarn if you want, but the basic tank is now complete. But I'll show you how to do the edge. You're going to use a size 10 millimeter or USN 15 10 millimeter crochet hook. It's a little bit smaller than our needle size that we knit with because we're going to go into every stitch around the edge. But if you're finding that this is too tight or too loose, you can change your crochet hook size. But I recommend trying the 10 millimeter crochet hook with the 12 millimeter knitting needles. Okay, now you're going to take a 9 millimeter crochet hook, same size crochet hook, and I'm going to have you start at the top of the sleeve because you just won't see this as much. I'd hate for you to have it look wonky kind of at the end of at your back. Okay, so take your work and join at the top of the sleeve, and we're gonna go in every stitch and just do a slip stitch at the base, and this just helps to create a more finished look. And basically it just connects, kind of connects everything together. So go into every stitch and you're going to go all the way around doing a crocheted slip stitch. And slip stitch is pretty easy. You just insert your hook, bring the yarn through, and then bring your yarn through like that. So this is how you do slip stitch. And again, if you don't feel like doing this, that's fine. This just helps to give it a little bit more of a finished edged look there. So continue this all the way around. I'll show you what to do once you get to the V-neck, the V part of your work. Whoops, picked up too many here. So like I said, I'll just show you what to do once you get right before the V. Okay, I've worked my way down that side. I'm almost to the V, and I've gone into that stitch, and I'm going to go in right here, slip stitch, and then I'm going to go in right over here and connect it. And this one I'm going to do pretty loose. And I'm going to see what it's looking like. Yeah, we might need to add a stitch here. Okay. So we've gone in here. I'm going to reach across and go into this stitch here. And then go across. You can kind of see, like hold it up and see how it's looking. You don't want it to be too tight. You don't want to skip too many spaces so it's too tight. And then you're just going to keep going into each stitch along this side and doing a slip stitch up this side. And you're going to do that same thing. You're working all the way down the other strap to the other V and just do the same thing. And then I'll show you what to do when you're all the way around and back to where you started. But just keep working around. You don't want it to be too tight or too loose. Just play with your gauge here. And it just creates this nice finished look. All right, I've gone into the last stitch, and then you find where you started with your slip stitches, and you just connect the work by going through the original stitch and doing another slip stitch, cutting the work, and then pulling this through. And then you can just weave in this end. And if you do have any gaps still, you can go back and weave in your ends and fix if you have any little gaps there. All right, so just continue the slip stitch border just like you did for the neckline, but just start at the bottom of the armholes. That'll be easier. And then just connect it down here. Okay. Now that you've got the slip stitch border finished, if you decided to do that, it's time to weave in all these lovely ends that you've got. And to weave in ends, I recommend turning the work inside out so you can see all the ends. And basically what you're going to want to do to weave in ends is to kind of follow the stitches through the work so they look a little bit more invisible. And you're going to want to kind of follow the work through a stitch and see how I'm just kind of weaving the stitch back through the work to follow the stitch that I'm by. And this is just, whoops, make sure you don't lose your yarn here. And I'm just following that stitch around, and then I'm just going to pull it through and kind of let it go. And then you really can't see that stitch on the other side. And you can just trim it, and you should be good to go. So just continue weaving in your ends, and then I'll see you back here after that.